Hello guys, welcome to SAP Security Training Day 2. On day 1 we talked about what SAP is and what is the background around SAP and different skill set which are part of SAP. Today we're going to talk about a overview around SAP security in general. So welcome again and let's start. SAP security has different components, and as you can see, there is a user administration, there is a role administration, there is authorization concepts, and how do you trace, that's called authorization trace, and the different SAP security tables. We will cover all these topics, I think, going forward, but today we're going to talk about SAP user administration. So SAP, as we talked about, SAP has a database, it has an application layer, as same as any other application. So if you are into SAP security domain, if you are working as a SAP security consultant or admin, you would be creating SAP users in SAP ABAP systems. So as we talked about, SAP uses something called Tcode, which are shortcut for screens or functions to do something. So when you talk about SAP user administration, the Tcode which you would be using mostly would be SU01 to create, update, delete, log, unlock SAP users one by one, or you would use SU10, which is updating the same thing but in a mass. Like suppose you have to create 10,000 users at one go, or delete them or log them, right, or extend them or assign some role. So you would use SU10. So as you say, yeah, SU01 and SU10 you would be using based on if you have to update a single user or if you have to update a number of users. So as you can see in the screen, you will type the Tcode on that dialog box or on the checkbox or the text box you're seeing right now. You will type SU01 there, and then that will take you to the next screen where you will actually create or update a user. So you will click on the SU01, hit enter, or just do F8. F8 is the shortcut to execute any Tcode in SAP. So either you execute it, hit enter, or just click on F8. So it will take you to the next screen, which is creating the user ID. So you would put your user ID. Suppose I'm trying to create a test underscore user. So that's my user account. So I would put that user ID and I will click on that highlighted icon, which is for creating. So once you do that, it takes you to this screen where you see different tabs. It starts from documentation, address, logon data, SNC, defaults, parameters, roles, profiles, groups, personalizations, and license data. So you do need to maintain, I would say, most of these fields. Not every field or tab is mandatory, but you will maintain them based on your need. So documentation tab I'm skipping for now. I think it's more of just for information where you can say, okay, this user ID is for some purpose. So that's, I would say, rarely used, but if you want to add more information for somebody to see in future, you can use that documentation tab. The main important tab or the first tab is the address, where you have to maintain the first name and last name of that user. So last name is a mandatory field, and you have to have last name field maintained. So for now you can just see I'm just putting a test as a last name and then a user as a first name. But yeah, you would put the actual first name and last name for the user. Then you can see there are different fields like the title. The full name would auto populate once you enter the first name and last name. Language, you can maintain the language for the user. It can be English or any other language which you want a user to work into. And then function, department. So suppose the user belongs to IT department, you will put IT as a department there. Or maybe function is like he's a SAP security consultant or he's a SAP basis consultant. And then I would say the next mandatory field you should maintain is the email ID. There are telephone number and other fields too, which you can maintain based on if you need those details for the user. But again, as I said, the mandatory fields would be last name, first name, and the email ID here. So you maintain those details and then you go to logon data. Logon data has fields like user type, it has fields like passwords. You need to maintain the initial password for user if you have to, and the user group, which we would cover in upcoming lectures. But for now, just understand these are the fields you will maintain for users. So you will say, so all the named account, like actual users, are always a dialog type. That means they can log into SAP as a normal end user. So the user ID would be dialog for named account. You would maintain the initial passwords, which the user have to change when they log in for the first time, or you disable the password if you're not using password and you have single sign-on enabled. User group is more of like a grouping where you assign a different user group based on if user belong to IT team or a user belong to finance or some other department. So if you want to have more information, it's like more metadata for user. Like if somebody come to you, say, okay, I want to find out all the user who belongs to IT, so the user group would be real help there. So assign the right user group, which we will talk about in upcoming lectures. But for today, just understand, maintain the user type, which is dialog, maintain the passwords, maintain the user group, and the valid from and valid to dates are the dates which drive if a user can log in, if they are valid or not. So if the valid to date is in past, they would not be able to log in. So for a user to be able to log into a system, they should have a valid to date which is in future. So yeah, you maintain valid to date. Generally we maintain 31/12/9999 if it's a end user, if it's employee. But if you have like a contractor or some temporary users, you will maintain their end date as per their contract. There are other fields like accounting number and cost center, which you can maintain it, but for now we will skip that as well. So once you maintain the logon data, you will go to the next tab, which is SNC. As I briefly mentioned about single sign-on, SNC in SAP is which enables single sign-on for this logon through SAP GUI client to ABAP system. So you will maintain the parameter if you have SNC configured and SSO configured in your system. If you can skip that if you don't have SSO enabled in your system. So yeah, you maintain the parameter as highlighted, and then you will go to defaults tab. The defaults tab again have some user specific parameters like, okay, the logon language, which language once they log in, they should see all the different screens and everything in SAP. So by default it takes the system logon language like English by default, or you can override that by maintaining a language just for user. Like if a user is Japanese or Chinese or any other country, you can maintain those languages here. Then you have decimal notation, which is like, if, as you know, US uses different format than EMEA or APAC, so you have to maintain that based on if user is US or EMEA or Europe or EMEA or APAC, which is like India or China, any other country. Same for date format. Time format, yeah, I think you can leave that default. And there is something called output device, which is the printer. So in SAP, sometimes the user would be printing the document, like they're printing the invoice, they're printing the PO. So this output device drive and which printer it should go into. So local means the printer which is connected to user machine in the same network. You can have other printers, but generally it's assigned as a local. Then there's a time zone, which is again based on which time zone user belongs to. So EST for Eastern time in North America, or you can maintain IST for Indian time zone. So once you have maintained defaults for user, you will go to parameters tab. Parameter are like a parameter values which will control default behavior or values for that user. Suppose you are creating a purchase order, few fields like company code and plant, which we will discuss in again upcoming lectures, can be pre-populated based on what you maintain here. So I would say for now, just understand parameters can define or pre-populate values for that user. Suppose you want to always say, okay, if I run a Tcode, I just want to always be using a layout which is specific to my country or my region. So we can control those things via this parameter. And again, even user should be able to maintain these parameters by, there is a Tcode called SU3. But for now, I think let's just focus on SU01. So you maintain parameters if there are some default parameter which has to be assigned to every users. So once you have done that, click on the next tab, which is called roles. This one I would say is the most important or most critical piece, where you assign actual SAP roles to users. So just for sake of this class, I would say understand their authorizations in SAP, like, okay, if I'm a security consultant, if I'm a basis, I would have different access than what basis would have. So SAP, they call it roles. So you will have a different roles built as a SAP security consultant, and then you will assign those roles based on which job or function the user belongs to. So for now, I think if I'm creating a user for SAP security, I would assign a role which is for SAP security team. So I would just assign a SAP security or whatever how you are building your role. Okay, so you can assign multiple roles, but I think the idea is to have a job role based role where you have one job role based on one job functionality. So SAP security will have one job role, and that can have multiple roles in it, and which is assigned across the landscape. Again, we will cover roles and everything in detail in coming lectures, but as understand, you create a user, you assign them roles so that they can perform or they can run the Tcodes they are supposed to run. Like suppose I am running SU01, right? So I do need some kind of access or roles which has that Tcode in it, so that I can run SU01 and be able to create a user. So once you have done that, you will go to the next tab, which is profiles. Again, profiles and roles you will talk in detail in upcoming lectures, but just for now understand, we don't assign profiles manually anymore now. So profile was something which was being assigned in older SAP versions when it was like a R2 or even before that, but we assign roles now, and we prefer assigning roles and not profiles. And every role we build has a corresponding profile assigned to it. So once you assign a role, it assigns the corresponding profile to that user automatically. There are still few profiles like SAP All and SAP New, which comes like when you install a system, it's there in your system, and that just like a God mode access in SAP. So it should not be assigned to any user in productive environment. In sandbox or dev system, it may be assigned to users like basis, who's initially like when they're trying to build a system. So this is only being used when you are building a system and it's not a productive system, right? Because this is like a God mode. You can actually do anything in SAP. So this is the first thing you need to make sure it's not being assigned to any user. So SAP All, SAP New are profile, which is God mode access in SAP, and it should not be assigned to any user, except this is the first time you are installing a SAP system and you need your basis guys to go and do all the configuration in a SAP system. So once again, roles, you assign roles, it takes profiles and assign that automatically to the user. Never assign a manual profile to user as a best practice, and then you should be good. I think we can skip the groups and the personalization tab. Again, these are rarely used, but based on which environment you are in, based on the client, maybe you will sometime use it, but we will skip that for now. The last tab is for licenses. So as you know, any software, there are licenses, right? You have to pay licenses for users you have in the system. So for same as SAP asks us to assign a proper license type based on what user is doing in SAP system. So as per your contract with SAP, you will have a different license type for users, and you have to assign appropriate license type for each user. And that's how SAP say, okay, maybe out of 4,000 you have 2,000 user which are like the professional license type, which is the most expensive license type for SAP. Or maybe out of 4,000 there are 1,000 users which are employee or ESS user, and they're like the cheaper ones. So again, the assignment of license is a different topic altogether, but for now, just for user administration perspective, understand you have to maintain these fields including license type. So once you have done that, you will complete the SU01. I think the next this screen talk about on how you assign the license type. And yeah, and once that is done, you click on the save button showing here. So when you click on save, it will create the user ID. So again, this is a basic overview around user administration for SAP, and we just covered how you will create a user in SAP by using SU01. So in upcoming lectures, we'll talk more about SU10, talk about more about the authorizations, the roles and tracing and different tables. But for now, we will wrap up this call. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you.